All right, here we go. So welcome everybody to Build, that should probably say building, but building real-world modern apps with Windows Azure mobile services on Windows Store, Windows Phone, and Android. And the amounts of code we'll see for each of those are probably in that order of magnitude that they appear there. Basically, this session, as I was saying, for those who weren't in the room before we started, this session builds on the overview session. So this is level 300. There'll be a lot of code, and there is an expectation that you've got some understanding of how mobile services works, because we'll be addressing issues that you'll commonly hit during development if you've gone and sort of got through the sort of level 200 content, and you're wondering, why can't I do this, or how do I do that? And we'll address each of those as we go. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce Eugenio Pace.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Eugenio Pace. I'm co-founder of Auth0. I was with many years in Microsoft, but I decided to do something about identity management. So our whole purpose in life, we're on a quest to make identity management, single sign-on, identity federation, all of that, dead simple. That's my goal.
Yep. And we'll see some examples of how you can essentially use identity providers that aren't provided in-box by mobile services through Auth0 and the mobile services extensibility points. So I'm Nick Harris. I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft, and I actually focus on mobile services and sort of Microsoft clients to Azure. So Android is a new space for me. Chris, my colleague, would probably be laughing. You probably watched him today. He focuses on Android and iOS. So let's have a look at what's in the agenda here. So today we're really going to address those questions that you're going to hit after you get past that sort of introductory level mobile services sort of implementation. So things with Auth, for instance, how can I cache credentials? How can I authenticate with other identity providers? Geospatial apps, how can we deal with geospatial data in a mobile service? Because we don't actually serialize up spatial data or go and scaffold the columns required for storing spatial data using dynamic schema. So we'll look at a way you can do that. Push, what do you do once you get past the first sort of 101 of push? You're delivering push notifications, but what do you do with those expired channels? How do you detect they're expired? And how do you do things like, for instance, perhaps back off sending notifications to clients which are perhaps temporarily disconnected and those types of things. So a couple small considerations that you'll need to know when you're building out solutions to make them more efficient when sending push. So we'll see that today as well. The last item there is sort of how can you automate deployments of your scripts using the CLI tools, and how can you version the actual APIs or the source or the script that's running within your mobile services backend. So a key example there would be if you've got clients deployed, say, to the Windows Store, but not everyone has upgraded, and perhaps there's a breaking change to the way you're processing or returning data. So really you need that server script to execute two different versions of that script for the two different versions of the client application. So we'll see a way of how to do that as well. So this is more about only showing slides when absolutely necessary and spending as much time in the IDEs as we can. So let's start with Auth. We're going to do a quick recap of what's provided out of the box with mobile services. That's Microsoft account, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. Then we'll look at how do we actually cache credentials so you don't have to log in every time using those identity providers. And then Eugenio is going to take us through and show us how to authenticate with other identity providers from within mobile services. So let's jump out and get started with the first demo here. So I'm going to use an application I created earlier. Let me show the Solution Explorer here. So it's just a simple Windows Store and Windows Phone application, and we've got a PCL here, portable class library with some data, or DTO that's used for persisting up to the mobile service. Anyhow, the one thing that we should point out in terms of the recap is if we look at how you interact with these identity providers, what we've got is a configuration item you need to do, and I've already pre-done this on this mobile service. And my IE is not responding. Give it a second here. Any questions so far? Why is IE not responding is a logical one. So let's just leave that for a second and hope it recovers. So there's some configuration that's done on the server side, and then on the client side, it basically becomes a one line of code to authenticate against these identity providers. So one line for Microsoft account, login async for Facebook, Google, and Twitter and such. And it's exactly the same on Windows Phone. So if you come here, you can see the API is consistent across both devices. So let me actually run the Windows Store application here. Everything seems to be breaking right now. Let me try here. Bizarre. Let's just try do that. Not a great start, is it, guys? We will recover. There we go. I don't care about that. All right. Let's start this guy up. So this is our Windows Store app. And we've got a little login here that wires up to those auth pieces that we saw. You can see up the top here that I'm not authenticated. Going to log in with Twitter. Authorize the app. Now that I'm logged in, you can see my Twitter ID. Now, that's pretty stock standard and straightforward for most people to implement. But if you're an application user and I go and launch this application again, you'll see that there's no caching of that credential. And if I wanted to hit a restricted resource, I'd need to actually authenticate again. So let's have a look at how you can cache credentials. So what I've done here is I've put in a little stub, cache credential, and what this does is calls a class called credential locker I created, and it passes in the mobile service's current user ID and their actual authentication token. If I jump into credential locker here, you'll see that add credential is not implemented. I've got a snippet for this. And what this uses is what's called the password vault. So this is a WinRT API class, and we can create a password credential for a resource we're going to call mobile services. We've got the username and the token, which we passed in before, and then we simply add it to the vault. To retrieve it, there's a get credential method here, and we simply search based on the resource and return that credential back. So the last thing we really need to do to cache credentials is in our app. When our app launches, we just say simply get credential. So we call get credential. If we've got a credential, we set the current user for our mobile service to the username and our token to the password or the token which we passed in to start with. And with those few simple lines of code, we've got credential caching implemented. So let's log in here and do the same thing we did the first time, but see that the credentials are now cached. So there's our Twitter ID. Let's close that, stop this guy, and let's run it again. And there, so he's logged in, he can hit that constrained resource. And I'd like to pass over now to Eugenio to start talking about how we authenticate against other identity providers.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. All right, so there's a couple of things that I really like about Azure Mobile Services. One is that it's a simple platform. The second one is that it's very extensible. It's built with extensibility in mind, which allows companies like ours to augment what it does out of the box and do something interesting in new scenarios. So talking about identity, let's use this example to illustrate what we're doing behind the scenes. So this is Fabricam. I'm sure you know the company. It survives every crisis, you know.
Yeah.
And it's as any traditional enterprise, they have an Active Directory to manage all their internal employees and all the authentication there. So that's John. They built an application, a very simple application for invoicing, tracking, and that's on Azure Mobile Services. So what Fabricam wants is that John authenticates, as he usually does, with its corporate credentials in Active Directory, and then access the resources in the mobile services with that, all right? So with that, I'm going to switch over to my little sample. Is this one? Yes. Let's run it. So what I've done is I've taken the same example that Nick wrote, and I added a couple things here. One is hours. Oh, I'm not showing.
So I think with PowerPoint these days, we just have to hit escape on that.
Got it.
There we go. Just dump it out. Okay.
Sorry about that. So we go here. Let's run it again so you guys see the entire thing. So this is the same sample as I was saying. You see all the out-of-the-box providers, and you see us as well. And I configured this application to trust Auth0, and I configured Auth0 to trust Fabricam's Active Directory. So what you see there is the default kind of ugly page in ADFS where John can enter its credentials. So let's go ahead and enter John's corporate credentials. We sign in. And you've noticed that the process is very similar to what you saw with Twitter. So exactly the same flow. We're using exactly the same process underneath. Once this completes, I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. There. So while it completes, I'm going to show you what's happening behind the scenes. So we are obviously not in the enumeration that you get with the mobile services APIs. So you cannot do mobile service authentication provided .auth0. But what you can do, what we are doing, we have this little helper class, which it only encapsulates all the basic HTTP requests that you didn't need to send to us. And then we ask it to log in into Fabricam, right? So we say login async into fabricam.com. If this returns successfully, what you get back is an object that represents an authenticated user with Auth0. And there's a couple properties in this object. So if you look in detail, you will see there's a name, there's a last name, other properties and attributes of John. But most importantly, what you get back is an authentication token that you can then send back into mobile services, right? So all the code here, the only thing that changes from the out-of-the-box experience with the built-in providers is what you do before you set the token. What you do before is just those 2 lines. Everything else is the same. If you look into what we're doing here, it's just a couple, it's not 2 lines of code, and this is kind of like a quick and dirty parsing that I'm doing, but I'm extracting the token from the response, which is, again, a basic HTTP request, and then that's what I'm using as a token, right? This is a library that is available as a NuGet package, so if you want, it's open, you can change it, you can use whatever you want, but if not, you can use this right away. So let's see if our guy is back. It is. So now we are logged in. That's John Fabricam. He's the founder of Fabricam, I guess. And if I call search, this is issuing a request into mobile services to query for invoices. I have 15 invoices. And if I click on add, I can add a new invoice into that. So it's a write operation and a read operation. Let's see if it worked. Now I have 16. It worked. Now let's try to log in with a different user. And this is Peter. We sign in, the same thing happened. Peter is now logged in. Seems it's John's brother. And if I query, I got 5 invoices. It's a different result set, right? So now let's take a look at what's happening here when I call those 2 buttons. First of all, this is a DTO that represents invoices in my mobile services backend. So it's a very simple entity. I have just an ID, I have a label, a total, and I have an owner. All right? When I click on add, all I'm doing is calling the insert async API into mobile services. That has nothing to do with Auth0. It's just a plain, normal API. And I'm adding here a fake data. And then when I query, I do something similar. I'm calling the mobile service.getTable with that type, with invoices type, and then I'm returning that as a list. Notice that there's no filtering or there's no code in here to differentiate between John and Peter, right? I'm not doing anything on the client side. Let's see how is that accomplished on the server side. So I'm going to switch here. This is my backend. That's my invoices table. And you will see all the columns are represented in the DTO. That's the owner. And as you might guess, what I'm using is the server-side scripts to automatically retrieve who the user is. So when I insert, what you should see is that I'm using the user object in the API on the server side to retrieve the user ID that is initiating this call, hopefully. And when I'm reading, what I'm doing is using the user ID object and the property in the user object to filter out invoices which are only for that owner, right? We'll come later into this. So just to recap how the entire flow works very quickly. Good. So the first thing we did is we initiated a call into Auth0, and we say, we want to log in with fabricom.com. We went to Active Directory, we logged in as John and as Peter. We returned a SAML token. So for those who are familiar with identity, with a SAML-based identity, what ADFS returns you is a SAML token, which is not compatible with Windows Azure Mobile Services. So what we do in Auth0 is we take the information in the SAML token and we translate that into a JSON Web Token, which is what Mobile Services understands. And then, from later on, every request that we make, we send that token to the backend. And so the user property, the user ID property in the user object in the backend is actually extracted from the token itself. So this is the anatomy of a JSON Web Token. It's not complete yet, but we will get there. So there's a header with some metadata, and there's the token itself with some properties of the user. So that UID that you see there, that's the user ID that gets into the server-side code. All right? So what prevents Peter to become John? Right? He can go, this is a token, it's an open text, right? It's clear text. In the client code, I could go there and replace user ID Peter for user ID John, or vice versa. That's not possible because JSON Web Tokens are signed, and they are digitally signed with a key, and that protects the integrity of the entire payload. So if I were to go in there and change UID, for example, then the server will reject that token because the signatures will not match. And the way the signatures are done is through the master key in Azure Mobile Services. That's like the shared secret between Auth0, the issuer of tokens, and Azure Mobile Services. So, I need to escape here. Is it here? Yes. Let me do an F5, just see if you can show the code. Anyway, so this is now our dashboard. This is when you create a new mobile services application in our dashboard, we automatically give you some places to configure the master key. So this is my mobile app. I go here. Let me do another refresh. Come on. Not responding. Can I switch over here? Okay, here's my plan B. So this is the same dashboard that we're seeing here. This is my application, my mobile application. And so when you create one of these, which you can do from here, new application, there's a bunch of applications that we support. Azure Mobile Services is one of the list. What you simply need to do is to say, yes, I want Azure Mobile Services, and you enter your master key. And from now on, all the JSON Web Tokens that we issue will be signed with this key. All right? You saw the connection with Active Directory, but that's not the only thing you can do. We support a bunch of social identities, so all the ones that you see there, Gmail, Facebook, all the usual ones. Anyone from Russia? We support like vContakte from Russia and other ones. And of course, all the enterprise ones, because we are aiming at that target. So Azure Active Directory, Google Apps, Office 365, Active Directory, native or through ADFS, what have you. And so here, let's see, do you have like 1 more minute?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
You can go and fix your IE.
I'll fix my internet connection here.
Great. So what I will do, let me bring this up a little bit. So in this case, we instructed Auth0 to log into Fabricam. So when I clicked on the option, I saw that directly. But one thing you can do is you can also show all the options, which is unlikely that you will do in an enterprise environment. You know which Active Directory you want to connect to. But it might be an option in other cases where you have multiple identity providers available for users, and you want to give them a selection, right? So what happens now when I don't specify the connection, I click the same. So instead of seeing the ADFS, and apologize, there's some flickering on the screen, only because I'm running a VM. What you see is this, which is the login widget, and it's like an identity selector. So you get all the other options, but here I have Amazon login enabled, I have Google, I have LinkedIn. Any one of the list that I had enabled, I could see here. So let's say if Amazon works today. There you go. Now I'm Eugenio with Amazon. I should be able to call the API as well. There you go. I have one invoice. If I create a new one, query again, 2 invoices. The format of the token is documented. The way the token is signed is also documented. So you can implement, you don't need really us. We just make it very simple because that's our goal. But you don't have to use Auth0. You can, if you follow the specs for the JSON Web Token, you can authenticate with the mobile services with literally anything. Okay? Are you set?
Yep.
I can keep going talking about tokens forever.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for coming up and showing us how that works. Eugenio, I do believe Eugenio has some sort of prizes for the end up here, so don't disappear. We will be back. And it seems as though something's not quite right with my machine here. So I apologize for that, but I'll work through it the best I can. So let's give this a second to load in the portal. While that happens, let's look at the next section. So the next segment is about geolocation. So mobile services-wise, dynamic schematization will inspect the JSON object that you're passing up to the REST API and say, oh, this is a text field, this is a numeric field or a date field, and it will go and scaffold the underlying columns within the database, the Azure SQL DB, for you. Geolocation, on the other hand, within Azure SQL DB or SQL Server, for instance, there's the concept or the type geography. Now, mobile services doesn't understand geography or well-known text, which is a standard representation of a spatial data type. So we need some way of going and implementing this scenario so we can build geospatial apps with a mobile services backend. And what I'd like to show you how to do here is essentially, from the Windows perspective, say, how do I know where I am? How can I add a place and store that up in my mobile service? And how can I perform a radial search to find places nearby, perhaps places within a mile, for instance? And that's what we'll build out in this segment. So let's I do have a backup, which I prepared here. There we go. I don't know why Chrome seems to be working, but I will run with it. So what I'm going to do, I'm within the mobile services portal. I'm going to create a mobile service, and we'll call it Geo Demo. Now, this is a new mobile service. Most of you should be familiar with this. I'm going to create a new SQL database, and the web tier is going to be in East US, and I'm going to co-locate the database tier in East US as well. And if my password is correct, let me try that one more time. Then we can go off, and this will now go and say my database credentials are incorrect. Okay, let me try this again. Geodemo, new database instance. And let's try that again. So this is going to go off and deploy a new database instance in EastUS, a new web tier for mobile services in EastUS, and once that's done, we can actually start working with it. But while that happens, let's jump back into our solution here, and we'll have a look at sort of the starting point that I've built out here to speed up the scenario. So I've got this solution called My Places. Now, currently, My Places is disconnected. And updating source control status, Joy. I think I've got like serious issues with my network on this machine. We thought it was just the other network there, but let's give this a second here. And in any case, imagine, if you will, with those bright and imaginative minds, that I was able to hit F5 on this, and that didn't even buy me enough time. Okay. Let me open it, another one. This is not fun today, is it? Anyone remember what the actual source control bindings are on these guys? Let's see if we can just delete them. Session 2, geospatial, Windows Store, C#. That may help. Any questions so far? Sorry. This is not fun. So we will ignore this. Okay, looks like we got something here that's going to work for us. So let's run this up. Now, My Places. Initially, we have this. We've got a Bing map and we've got a position. That position is in the middle of basically nowhere, or 0, 0. Now, I want to know where I am. Other things which I want to know is, for instance, what's within 5 miles of me or 2 miles of me. And lastly, I also want to know or be able to add places or points of interest. So what we'll do is we'll look at where am I, we'll look at how to add a place, and then we'll look at how to query back those places. So let's start with the first step, which is to know where am I. Now to do that, I'm just going to go into here. So this is my main page of that application, and we can use what's called the geolocator. And we'll say this is a new geolocator, and now we can use this to find our location, and it's asynchronous. Await locator dot get geoposition async, and then we can simply say I've wired up this method so it just returns a position that's bound to the UI. So I can now say var position, and we'll just say latitude is equal to our current location dot coordinate latitude, and our longitude is our location dot coordinate longitude. Put a semicolon there, and if we F5 this now, we'll see that we should turn up in, where are we this time? Anyone know where that is? Is it close? New Orleans. So it's a little bit out, and that's probably due to wherever this IP address is coming from. So the network for this particular LAN here is being resolved to that point or location. So maybe they've got satellite out back, or maybe it's being routed through some provider. But in any case, if you don't have GPS in your device, the geolocator is going to do a geo IP lookup and find the best known place for where you are. So in this case, that's where we are. We're in New Orleans, a couple of miles down that way. So the next thing we wanted to do was to be able to add this place. So let's do that. So to add a place, I'm going to need a couple things. I'm going to need to know where my mobile service is. So I'm going to go into my GeoDemo X here. Going to go to the dash, so the quick start. I'm going to select Windows Store, which is what we're working with at the moment. And I'm going to grab a reference, which essentially has our endpoint and our app key. I can grab that and drop this into one of three choices. Let me close them. I'll get back to that. So we'll come here and I'll drop this in. And with this client, it's essentially a client proxy which we can use to go and call into our mobile service. So when I go to add a place, it happens here. I've got an on-click method. I new up a place DTO, which is essentially transmitted over the wire. And I'm going to say await app.mobileservice.getTable. In this case, I'm getting a reference to the place table. And I'm going to insert async the place object that we've got. So that will now insert a place for us. So let's run this. We'll add a place here. Click add. It's now going off and it should be storing it within our mobile service. The table place does not exist. So key thing, while we do have dynamic schema, we do have to create the table. So we create the table, and this table is something for people who weren't in the sessions today or the other day. There's only one column, ID, and basically dynamic schematization, when it interrogates that entity, will determine what columns should be added to your table. So let's do that again. This time we should not have an exception. Pull that in there, go here, drop into the portal, browse, wait. I can't do anything about network, right? Maybe I'll just tether my phone if it continues to be no good for us. You can do it. Any guys here from network and infrastructure? Just want to diagnose this for me? No? Okay. Let's kill that one. That seems to be timing out. Let's restart. Let's try and add a place again. See what happens here. Deary me. Well, that seems to work. Not really having any joy there. Nope. Let's put a breakpoint here and there. That's working. That's working. Get table place, insert place. There we go. For whatever reason, I don't know why I was having issues there. I do believe it's network. I've had some problems all day. But in any case, we now have our data. We've got our latitude, longitude, and the data that was in the dialog. Now, this is good and well, but if you recall, if we want to start performing radial searches, a latitude and longitude in that format is not an easy thing to work with as far as SQL is concerned. A geography data type allows you to do really cool things like it's got a whole bunch of built-in functions like st-distance, st-intersects, and it just makes working with spatial data really easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something here. So whilst we go off and we go and add all these columns for you and you don't have to touch SQL, sometimes it's actually necessary. And in the spatial data case, it is necessary. So let's have a look here. This is my mobile service. So that's the database server which I chose to use before. And in this case, I've got the DB, which underlying to my mobile service is called GeoDemoDB. And I can refresh this guy. What's that, sorry? Did I put an X there? Thank you, sir. Saved the day. So what we've got here are our columns. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go off and drop things which I don't need. I don't need latitude and longitude stored as float. I want a location column called location, that's of type geography. And I'll basically, since we're deleting the latitude and longitude, we may as well get rid of the existing data that's in there. So let's execute this. Okay, and let's grab the right DB this time. Are you kidding me? Come on. Okay, hold on. Let me do new query down here. We can do it. We can connect. Now we're on the DB. And what's wrong with you now? Invalid column name location. Did you execute last time? No. Okay, step by step. Done. Add location. Done. Yeah, that's fine. I see. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So now what we've got is we've got some nicer, essentially, columns to work with spatial data. But we've got this disjoint now. We're passing up latitudes and longitudes of type double, and somehow they have to get into this location data type of type geography. And to do that, we can use what's called server-side script. So if I come back to the portal, we've got script here. So on insert, this is where I actually needed my IE, because I've got all sorts of cool snippets here. So let's just do this. On insert, I want to essentially take that entity that's being inserted, which comes across in the item column, and I want to convert that essentially from latitude and longitude into a geography data type. Now to do that, this is a simple insert operation for our 3 columns. It's got values. These are replacements. First one, title, place. Now geography, st point from text, uses what's known as well-known text. It's just a textual representation of a spatial type. In this case, it's point, open, longitude, space, latitude, close, comma, the spatial reference ID, which is, there's a number of them. They just represent different spatial coordinate systems. The one we'll use is 4326. And with that, we convert our doubles into the geography data type, and then we can use the MS SQL object to execute our query. And just here, we provide those replacements to go in. So that's the save piece. So that's going to save it as a location. And now we've got it as a geography data type. What about that read back where we wanted to say what's within a certain radius of where we are? So what we need to do on the read side of things is we need to do a similar sort of thing. We need to take that location and then flatten that data back out into the DTO that the client expects, one that has latitude and longitude as separate properties. But we also need to say, how do we query for something within that search radius that we see here on the screen? So we need an origin and a radius, essentially. Now, I'm going to write the client code for this piece first. So if we come here, what I've got is a placeholder, and you can see this query places. So what I do is I create a filter. Now, mobile services with server-side scripts and the CRUD operations here, the inserts, the updates, deletes, you can't actually provide additional parameters. But what you can do is you can use a property of the entity that you're passing up to be that parameter store for you. And in this case, I'm calling that parameter filter. So what I do here is I create a filter. It takes my origin location and a radius in kilometers, because I'm from Australia and I still don't understand miles, apart from it's a whole lot further than a kilometer. That's probably why everyone in America is fitter than Australians, right? Because you go to the gym and I'm just going to do 1 mile. When I go to the gym in Australia, I'm just going to do a kilometer. And I hit a kilometer and I can't go any further because 1.6 Ks just seems like so much further. In any case, we create a filter, and I'm just using a comma-separated list here, and I'm passing in my current latitude, my longitude, and a radius. So that's how I get the filter up there. To query what's coming back, we actually need to say query places. And we use the mobile services client again. We call getTable, and I'm providing a filter here saying where filter is equal to my string-based filter we just created. Now, this is an unusual use of this sort of expression for filtering. Normally, people would use it to say things like p dot, it's one of the properties. We could say ID is less than 10. So that's the standard use case, and this is why this is sort of the next steps or how you get around things that you may hit in your real-world apps. So we're going to use it to pass up a parameter. And then the last thing we need to do is to basically, let me copy that, take that filter we passed out when we're performing our query and actually flatten out the data. So let's say, essentially this here is going to give us back that comma-separated list of filters, the latitude, longitude, and radius in an array. We define a query which flattens out our location, latitude and longitude into what the client app expects. And then to perform our radial search, we simply say, give me everything where the location field of the place in the DB intersects, and here we're doing the same trick to convert to geography data type, intersects my origin, which is what I pass up in the filter, that's why it's parameterized, and it's within the radius distance. Where that returns 1, we're finding everything that's within that given radius. And with that, I take my templated string, provide my parameters, and execute my SQL query. On success, I respond. So let's hit save. Now, if you recall, in SQL Management Studio, we deleted all of our data. So let's rerun this app here. Now let's hope it finds us somewhere. Are you going to work this time? There we go. Okay, so there we are. Let's add a point. Let's add one there, remove these breakpoints. That'll just slow us down. So let's add one on the peripheral here. Let's add one in close. And what I'll do now is I'll change my filter to be 1 mile, and you can see that now it's gone and filtered out that result set. If I filter back to, say, 5 miles or whatnot, we're going to get those other 2. So that's radial search and how you can deal with spatial data in Windows Azure Mobile Services. Because of the network issues here today, I'm not going to spin up the Android version of the app, but I will show those Android. Are there Android developers in the room? Anyone? I know who you are. Okay, a couple guys. You can stay. I won't kick you out. Perfectly valid scenario. So Android, we have a nice client library as well for your mobile services clients. You can get those libraries basically through this option here, Android, and there'll be a download for the Android developer tools. Working with the client, it's much the same as it is in all of the other platforms. We've got a mobile services client. We've got operations for getTable in this case, at getTable of place, and then we can say, you can see an insert operation, again, is much the same using the semantics for a callback here as well. So, sorry, I lost it. So from the Android perspective, development experience, again, makes the client very simple to interact with that REST API. You don't need to go down to HTTP client level at all. So that's Android and Windows Store. Let's jump back to the deck and see what's next up. Gonna have to go and get moving along here. Okay, so push notifications. You should have seen, if you've been to any of the mobile service ones, a push notification in the form of a toast. Question up the back. Yeah, no, so on insert, what I did with that is in the insert operation, I'm basically using the MS-SQL object rather than request.execute to strip that out. So I'll show you that for a second so you can see what's going on. Yeah, so you can see that it's not here, and that's because on insert, I'm actually forming the insert operation. So for those of you that have seen mobile services in action, where you're dealing with types that can be easily schematized, this operation is normally request.execute. And that's all you would need typically to save your data. It's only because we're trying to convert our type into a better representation for the DB in our application scenario. And we filter out the filter property in our insert statement there. So returning to the deck here, push notifications, toasts, tiles, badges, all of the stuff you see with Windows 8 that drive your live tiles and Windows Phone. Push notifications are how you can achieve that. I'm not going to go and show you how to implement that scenario because that's covered in the overview sessions that'll be available online. We're going to look at the next steps. What do you do once you've got that scenario? And the two key things that I get asked quite a lot are, how can I handle expired channels? So if you've got an expired channel, you shouldn't really be sending a push notification to that because it's not going to do anything. It's just adding extra CPU workload for you on the server side. And in addition to that, how do I handle response messages that are being returned, in this case from WNS, that's the Windows push notification service used for Windows Store apps. It actually returns a response when you post a notification to a given channel toward it. That response has some useful status information that you can utilize to make your push solutions more efficient. For instance, it returns back device status or if that device has been throttled. So if you're throttled or if you're temporarily disconnected, you don't really want to be trying to send notifications to that because that's adding extra workload for you. Doesn't really matter if you're only dealing with, say, 100 or so client apps, but when you start dealing with 100,000, 1 million, filtering out this excess noise that you don't need is quite important. So let's look at the push notification lifecycle here very quickly. I'd expect in this session that you would know this from the prior ones, but it's a simple 3-step process. In your client app, request a channel. That goes off and calls, in this case, push notification service. It could be MPNS if you're using Windows Phone or APNS or GCM. Once you receive that channel, you store it in your mobile service until the point in time you want to send a push. From there, you authenticate and send your push notification, and that delivers a push notification. So the real place that we're actually... what's going on here? I'm in a view I'm not really used to. Here we go. Is that... No, it's not showing up there. There's the pen. Okay. So what we're really going to look at is two key things. The channel that's given to you in this step 1 has an expiry. We'll look at how you can handle that to purge any expired channels from your DB. We'll also look at the response that WNS actually sends back and how you can use the last known status of that device to make a better decision of when you actually send your push notification on your scheduled time. So let's jump into the portal again and Visual Studio and have a quick look. So I've got here should have a Windows, here's my push solution, and I'll make this code available online. Hello there, TFS. You've been disturbing me today. So I've got a solution here, Windows Store, Windows Phone. I've got a channel. Now what I've done here that's different from my session the other day is I'm persisting the expiry of the channel, and I'm also using a device ID as a unique identifier for that channel for this particular application. So if we come to the client app, we can see the first step, request a channel. Here we go. Looks like this. Call into the WinRT API, retrieve a channel, get your ID for this device, so that won't change. We're going to use that to uniquely represent or use as a lookup to detect duplicate inserts. If I ran this up twice, really it's going to try and insert 2 channels, right? And we only have 1 unique channel per device, so we don't need 2. So I'm going to use device ID on the server side to determine if this is a duplicate and should be updated on the server side. In addition to that, I've added a device type, and this device type is telling me if this is a Windows Phone app or if it's a Windows Store app. In this case, it's Windows 8. If we were to look at the Windows Phone solution here, this is probably familiar to the phone developers, but to request a channel is not as straightforward in Windows Phone as it is in Windows Store apps. So you do basically a whole bunch of jiggery. That's what I like to call it. And then when you finally get your channel, you can go off and register that. And what I'm doing here in this case is I'm getting this device's unique ID and using that to set the device ID. The phone ones don't come with an expiry, like the channels that are returned from Windows Store that are returned for Windows Store apps. So we're not doing anything in this case, except that when the channel changes, an event fires on the client, and that will always be calling register channel, and they'll perform the update for us based on device ID. And again, device type is Windows Phone here. So let's spin these guys up. Let's deploy this guy and start this guy. Oh, let's just deploy that too. Let's go over here. So this is my Windows Store app. I've got a wide tile. Let's let Windows Phone Emulator spin up here while we go to the portal and start looking at the handling of the insert of that channel. So I'm going to jump into Push Demo. We've got a channel table pre-created here. And if we drill in, you can see that this is my entity. We'll talk to the notification status column in a bit. This is actually populated on the server side. But we've got device ID and we've got expiry. So we're going to treat both of those. On insert to this table, rather than trying to cache an ID of the mobile service entity that was being inserted on the client, who was in my overview session the other day? A couple people yesterday? You were there. So rather than caching the ID and determining on the client side whether it's an insert or the update, we just always do an insert in this case, because that local settings state bag that we're using actually will get deleted in certain scenarios on the client. So that would leave orphaned channels up in your service. So that's why device ID is much more powerful in this case for determining that. And this is how we use it. We say, when I go to insert, get a handle to the channel table, perform a lookup where the device ID column is the same as the device ID that's being inserted. If we have a result set, then what we're going to do is we're essentially performing an update of that existing item, updating its URI, and just saving that back to the DB. Otherwise, we're performing the standard request execute, and that's going to perform an insert for us. So that's how that works. One useful thing here is if you're going to have hundreds of thousands of channels or whatnot, and we are doing a query on that, you can come and index the device ID column, or any other column for that matter, within the portal by hitting set index, or if you prefer doing it from a SQL perspective, you can go and do it in Management Studio as well. That's something to take away as well with this solution. So now that's got our channel up in there, right? So we need to actually go off and say now, well, perhaps, oops, Kids Corner, not today. So let me run this client app so it registers the channel and just give it a sec to do that. So what I've done is I'm just using a scheduled job here. As a placeholder, we saw this in the overview session of how this actually works. It just runs on an interval. I've got it disabled at the moment so we can use it for testing purposes. But this is the basic 101 send a push notification type solution. It's easy to read, but there are improvements we can make to this. So the first thing that we do in this case is get a handle to the channel table, read out the results, so we get a list of channels, and iterate through each one. I'm now using the device type property to determine if this is a Windows 8 app. If it's a Windows 8, I'm pushing through WNS. In this case, I'm just using a simple wide text template type to go off and update the tile. Windows Phone, I'm using MPNS. Within here, there's also GCM if you're doing Google, or APNS if you're doing iOS devices. So that's how you'd send push notifications to those client platforms. In this case, for Windows Phone, I'm going to send a toast. So what we'll do here is let's update the channel of our TechEd app just by launching it as well. And that's wired up to the on launch to go and update that. So let's do that. And now let's run this. And hopefully, we won't see it if that's running because I've bound to the receipt of a toast. So you can see there's my Windows Phone toast. And we can see here that there's my Windows Store app tile update. So that's a simple scenario. Let's have a look at how you should really handle these scenarios to first delete expired channels, because we don't want to iterate through all expired channels, right? There may be a lot. And how we can handle response types from WNS. So first thing I'm going to do here is update this entry point. We're going to call this one do push. And we're going to come here and we're going to say clean channels. And then we're going to say do push. Now, in my cool IE snippets, I've got a clean channels method. And it's quite straightforward, really, just a little bit of SQL. So we're going to say delete from the channel table where the expiry column is less than the current date. Makes pretty good sense there in that case. What that means is you're not going to be iterating through a percentage of channels that may be expired. We execute that with the same MS SQL query, and I've just got success and error handling here to log results of that. Now, of course, we won't have anything that's expired today, so we won't see any results there. So that's handling your expired channels. Quite easy, worth doing, particularly when you've got a system that's going to be running for a long time. People will install your app. People may uninstall your app. You don't want to be trying to send to apps that have been uninstalled. Let's have a look at the response from WNS. MPNS and other platforms provide similar things. So what I'm going to do here is just put in a success function, and that returns a response. Sorry for my parameter naming, but let's say console.log, the response that comes back. And let's put in another handler here. This is the error callback, and we'll just say E, and we'll say console.error E. Okay. So I'm going, this green basically means I've got a mixture of tabs and white space. So I'm going to save that, hit run once. And now what we'll have in our log here is we'll have the response back from WNS. So you can see this here. Let me pull it up on the screen. This is the payload returned from WNS, and the one we're really going to look at today is XWNS notification status. You can see this says received. That means that WNS has received the push notification. It doesn't mean that it has delivered it to your client app yet, but it means, hey, I've received it as WNS, and I'm going to try to deliver that. But these states can actually come back as many different states. So let me show you a little bit of documentation on that, and then we'll look at how we can handle that. What am I doing in that one? I should be back here. Drill into the scheduler. And we will say, I'm going to copy the end solution because we're running low on time. And drop this in. I'll show you what's different. This is all the same still, right? We'll treat this query in a second. What I've done in place of logging, I've just said handle WNS response. Now, I still log the response, and then I say, let's set a notification status property on the table to that header value that we saw, and let's track when we last sent to this device and update that channel table. A list of the response codes is available on MSDN. So the handling I'm doing here is quite a basic handling. Say x-WNS-notification status. And you can see that you've got received, dropped, and channel throttled. So really these two you should back off a little bit. If your scheduled job is running every 15 minutes, perhaps you only want to send to these every hour or so until perhaps it comes back to received. You may want to do an exponential back off. I haven't implemented that today. I'm just going to show you how to hold for an hour before sending again. So once we've got that information stored, it actually becomes really easy. What we've got here in do push, I've updated it to use SQL. You could drop this in a stored procedure if you prefer, and just use execute your stored procedure name. I've done it here because it's easier to sort of show you on screen, but we're just selecting all the channels where the notification status is null, which means it's a newly registered channel and it's never been pushed to before, or where the status is received. So again, that's something that we know that we can send to now at this point in time. Or the last case is if the status is not received, i.e. dropped or throttled, and the last time I sent it was over an hour ago, then I will return that result set back. And so we execute that SQL, and we'll get all received or all new channels, and any channel with the state not received that's been sent to over an hour ago. So rather than hitting it 4 times, we're hitting it every hour in this case. And with that, it's the same code, it just iterates through. We can save that and execute it, and basically it's just going to do the same thing. It's still going to go and deliver the notifications because we don't have any data outside of the good data set today, but our queries will handle that. We can drill into our channel here, and we can see notification status for our Win8 device, which is where we wrote this code, is set as received. Windows Phone supports the same sort of, basically the same notification status properties. So that's that one. Let's jump to the deck here for a second. I don't think I'll even put it up in full screen. This is good. Let's talk about API versioning and how do I script deployments. I'll use both actually as part of the demo. So if you've got a client application and you're changing the way it consumes entities and the data structure of that entity, you may have that app in store, you may have 10,000 downloads, and you may end up in situations where half the people have updated their app and the other half the people haven't. So really you need your service tier to be able to send back the data in the form that's required for those different versions of your client apps that are sort of lagging behind out there. And on top of that, you may want to automate the deployment of these scripts. So we've been editing directly in the portal. You may want to edit scripts locally and actually publish them up using CLI tools, either directly from your dev machine or perhaps as part of a build process for whatever source control you have. So I'll show you how those tools work. So the first thing that we'll do here is we'll click across to our version demo, and we'll go into my foo table, and we'll just add a little piece of, or we'll remove this piece of script and save that. So what we'll do, let's start with CLI. I've got it here, so you can get the Windows Azure SDK and CLI tools. And what I've got locally on my file system, let me show you this. I drill into my versioning one, and I've got this script before. So see, this is an insert item.bar do v1 specific work. So let's automate the deployment of that. We've got this. This is our CLI tools that will run on your Macs or Windows devices. You can pull in your account information using the account command. I've already done that. And you'll see that you can actually manage your entire Windows Azure infrastructure with this, across mobile services, service bus, everything. We're going to look at mobile today. So we're going to use Azure Mobile. And then you'll see we've got specific things for mobile services, working with tables, working with scripts, creating scheduled jobs and whatnot. We're interested in updating a to-do script here. And so let's say script, and we'll say upload. We want to supply a file, and on my file system we're going to do the before version and the service name that we provide to this. There is help on each of these, so you can do dash help. I remember it, but we're going to supply the mobile service name, and then we're going to supply where we want this script actually saved, and we want that on foo.insert on the actual table. So that will go and take that script locally and upload it, and if we return back to the portal now, and we click across here and then click back, it'll reload it, and you can see now we've got v1 specific work. So that's the CLI tools. So what I'll do here is show you now how we can implement versioning within our solution. So at the moment, we know if we go off and if we insert that item that we're just updating the bar property to say, do V1 specific work. From my client perspective, what I want to be able to do is to control the version that's passed up to my service and then have my service look at the version and determine what code should be executed. So to do that, we've got what's called the mobile services client uses the HTTP client, and that's got an extensibility point, and that's called a delegating handler. I'm going to add an existing file here for sake of time that has this implemented. So this is delegating handler as part of system.net.http, blah, 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 blah. How's it all going? I've been talking for an hour. It's hard to code standing up while you're talking, you know. But in any case, we can override send async. And this is what I'm calling my version handler. You may have one called logging handler, for instance. You could have one to do any number of things. We're using it purely for versioning here. We can get a handle to the request. I'm taking the absolute URI, determining if there's query string parameters, and I'm just dropping on version is equal to 2. I then update the request, and then it drops back in to call the base. Now, how does your mobile service make use of this? Well, you can come in here, and there's another parameter called handlers. So I can say new version handler. Oops. And with that, we've now got our version handler. Now, this version handler requests for version 2, and at the moment, our service doesn't know how to handle that. So how do we go from that query string parameter version to actually doing something specific in text? Well, let me use the magic of CLI deployments to drop that code in for you. Let's see if we're going to do a nice read from the server side here. So you can see what we can do is we can say request.parameters.version, and that's going to pull our query string parameter. People may ask, why don't you just use a version HTTP header or something like that? Today, you don't actually have access to the raw HTTP request that's coming into your mobile service. So the only thing or way to do this today is using the parameters on the query string like this. So with that, if it's greater than 1, it's going to say greater than 1, else it's going to be 1. So let's run our application here. And if I hit version, it'll eventually come back. Did I have a breakpoint there still? No. You can do it. Come on. Let me put a breakpoint on this puppy so we know that we're hitting it. I do have one there. That's interesting. Seem to be having all sorts of fun today. There we go. F10. Did we step over successfully? No, it's just waiting. So eventually, at some point, when this goes and hooks in properly, it'll actually execute that V2 specific code, and you'll see that our bar has come back greater than V1. So there you go. It's now hitting greater than V1 because our version was set to V2. Now, the cool thing about this is it puts all of that sort of configuration, etc., down into this one little file. You could put that as a constant up the top or whatnot, or in a constants file, and you're done. But essentially, that's CLI deployments and versioning. So that's all I had for you today. We do have 6 minutes, so I might actually try and do something sort of special here for you. And this should play on the real world stuff in the title. So what I've got is a gadgeteer device, .NET Micro Framework. And what I did is all of the client libraries for mobile services are actually published on GitHub. So I took the client library and I backported that to .NET Micro Framework. And what we've got now is a very thin V-slice of essentially a client you can use from an embedded device. And if I can get control of Visual Studio here, what you can do within your mobile services now is you can make use of partners like Auth0, or in this case, I'm making use of a partner called Pusher. And Pusher provides essentially a socket-based eventing system. So when I collect data, I'm inserting that up to my mobile service, but I then will take that data, store it in the DB for legacy purposes, and I will then go off and say, hey, this is stored in the DB, but let's raise an event so anyone listening to this can actually see my data. So let me start this client up here. It'll take a few seconds to run. And basically, the API looks a lot the same as a lot like your standard mobile services client, because it's just a backport. And we take measurements. This is a lot of build-up. I'm hoping this is going to work for you. We take a reading of humidity and light and temperature, and then I simply insert that up into my mobile service. So let's have a look at the end result. It should be working now. We can see some readings coming in here. What I've got is a Windows Azure website that is a listener for this event-based data. So here it is. It'll take a few seconds till it gets its first reading. It's about every 5 seconds it's going to come in. So we can see the first data point here. We've got humidity up the top and temperature coming in. And this is near real time. It's coming direct off the device. If I grab the sensor here, we should see the humidity go up because I'm panicked. Because I've got 3 minutes and 30-something seconds. But my temperature is still quite low because it's absolutely freezing in this conference center. That's basically that. So that's a really an example of how you can, utilize mobile services from not just things that have supported client libraries, but given it's a REST API, you could write a client library in any language you want and start pulling together scenarios like this one here. So thank you. So let's close this up, and then we'll do some offline Q&A and some questions. So summary, we did auth. We saw how you can cache credentials, how you can extend to use other identity providers. We did geospatial scenarios. We looked at how you can better manage your push notification solutions. We did CLI deployments for automated deployments and API versioning. We looked at some real-world data being graphed alive through mobile services. We've had a very great guest, Eugenio, here today to take us through identity.
Yeah. So if you really want to know how SAML tokens and all that thing works, there's a really good guide. Not that I wrote it, but it's a good guide anyway, that Microsoft wrote about that. You can grab. There's not for. I don't think we have for everyone, but they're free.
Maybe we can have an identity question or something, and
yes.
They can be guaranteed a book. Anyone? One over there?
How do you don't want 10 persons to be able to use this? How do you manage the verification of that this user is allowed to use this application?
Sorry, if you had what? I missed the...
If you want to limit the number of users,
Right.
how will you limit the number of users? How will you configure it to limit?
I only want John and Peter to use this tool, but I can use Twitter. Okay.
Yeah.
How do I manage the user which can be using this application?
Right.
So the question is, how do you limit who in the company uses the application, right? Well, I guess there's many ways of solving that, of course, and it depends. That's the other one. But what I showed is a very simple token transformation, which is just grabbing what you get from the identity provider and sending it back. You can actually write more sophisticated code in the backend, where you can say anybody that is a member of this group, for example, has access. So instead of asking for the user ID, you might be asking for a group membership. In the end, if you, Nick, can you switch me back to my,
Yep.
or the deck or anything?
There you go.
Come on. No?
Zach?
Switch to yours and go to the... on the one on the token.
Okay.
So the token has a number of properties by default, which are those, but you can add anyone you want, anything you want. So you can have like something else there that says role or location or presence or whatever, country, and you can use that to drive behavior. You can also do it outside the application, and you can have like something like Auth0 reject the issuance of a token. So if you don't belong to this group, or if you are not in this country or whatever, I don't give you a token at all, right? That's another way. So claims-based identity, which is what all this is based on, has an implicit authorization in there, besides the classic authorization, which is, do I give you a token or not? If you don't have a token, you cannot do anything. Make sense? Cool.
Okay.
Yes, you?
I have a few legacy websites using membership providers.
Yes.
How do I integrate the authentication between membership providers and mobile services?
Can I switch here?
Let me give you a mouse back.
So if anyone wanted a book and you didn't get one, just write me an email. Oh, I have two? Two more? I have two more if anyone wants. All right. If you use us, membership is one of the supported identity providers, right? So when you log in here, no. So one of the supported is a database, and you say, this one, for example, and you can choose from any templates. So membership, voila. Now you can connect to a membership database directly from here. So it's as simple as that. Now, if you don't want to use any of these, what you need to do is you need to wrap membership into an STS, which is technically the layer that transforms an authentication request into a token, right, into a security token. So there's many ways of doing it. Again, we are trying to make it very simple, so we give you this experience. New database, the code for membership, and that's it. Yes?
I have two questions. The first is Azure Mobile Services question. What types of tokens does it accept? Is it just JOTs, or does it do SAML? Well, it doesn't do SAML too, but does it do JWT?
No.
It's just JWT?
It's JSON Web Tokens and in a specific format. Okay. So actually the caveat why it's different from other services is that the signature is not really with the master key. You have to take the master key and append JWT SIG and use that.
So that has to be in your key?
Yes, you have to take the master key from your account in Azure Mobile Services, append that, and then do that algorithm.
Okay. Oh, that's pretty cool. Second question. Why'd you pick the Gadgeteer over the NetArena?
It's what I had in my... what I had at home when I was drinking beer on a Saturday afternoon when I built it. So, what's that, sorry? That one's available on my blog, and it's only a very thin slice of the mobile services client SDK I've ported. Basically, just an insert to get your data off the device. So, nickharris.net, there'll be 2 or 3 blogs down will be the one about this, and you can go off to GitHub and grab that client library and the full sample you saw today.
I've got a question real quick. On the mobile services, the server-side queries,
Yep.
I don't have a lot of experience there. I guess it's some sort of JavaScript or similar.
Yeah, so it's JS that's executed under Node. So you've got access to Node modules like crypto and all sorts of things.
The real question,
Yep.
I guess, was it look like
Come on.
It can be pretty complex in that one little section you've got there. Is there ways to call out to other browsers and kind of segment that?
There's nothing like that today, but it's certainly feedback we're hearing.
I'm actually building an STS. So.
Yeah. So
Good luck.
it's certainly something we're looking at. So we'll be available down the front here or out front to answer more questions. We need to jump off so Robert can jump on stage here. I don't actually. They're all back there. But if you give me yours, I'll drop you an email. Okay. It's Nick